Welcome to Run in Focus, a podcast brought to you by the Radicalization Awareness Network. My name is Maya Rosen, and today I'll be talking to two amazing frontline practitioners and experts from different countries in Europe about the rise of accelerationism and the violent right-wing extremist movement. This term basically describes the white nationalist goal to accelerate and speed up what they see as an inevitable race war, I guess you could say, with the aspiration of basically creating a white ethno-state. As some of you may have noticed by my voice, I'm a new presenter. My name is Maya, I'm from Sweden, and I have been a part of Ren Young since I was 18 years old, so it's been a while. I'm looking forward to really digging deep into these emerging and trending topics in PCVE and discussing them with my wonderful guests on this podcast. So without further ado, let's get started. Our first guest is Will Baldet, and he is a Policy and Practitioner Fellow at the Center for the Analysis of the Radical Right and also a Senior Countering Violent Extremism Advisor to the UK Government. He has done a lot of research on accelerationism, so I'm convinced he can help us with some of the questions we have around this issue. Hi, Will.
Hi, Maya.
Nice to meet you. How are you doing?
Yeah, nice to meet you. I'm good, thank you. I'm good.
I bet a lot of our listeners haven't even heard about accelerationism. So could you just tell us a little bit of what it is and why it's important to speak about this at the moment?
Accelerationism is actually an old concept repackaged for the digital age. So it's been around since the 1980s. It was put forward by a neo-Nazi white supremacist called James Mason in America. He's still alive, he's still around, and he put it together in a book called Siege. And the concept is that if you really want to fundamentally restructure society in your own vision as a white supremacist, you first need to tear down the existing structure. It's set up inherently to resist change. So the only way to change it and to create a new world order, a new world vision, is to tear down the existing vision. And in order to do that, there are things you can do to accelerate that process.
That's very heavy, and I really hope this makes people understand why we need to acknowledge this as a real problem. Could you explain a bit more about how this is different from traditional forms of right-wing extremism that are, I think, more usually talked about in the PCE world? What makes this different?
So as you go down these kind of accelerationist rabbit holes, you can find yourself in Satanist networks. You can find yourself being advised that rape and paedophilia are all legitimate tactics. If society is awash with these kind of the most horrific and extreme of crimes, then bit by bit society will fracture under the weight of the degradation, essentially. And ultimately that will bring down the politicians, it will bring down the government, and it will crash society. And that's the accelerationism aspect of it. You're speeding up that process and bringing it around quicker than if you were waiting around for the revolution to happen.
That's absolutely horrifying, but you're right there in the field and you're a practitioner. So how did you come across this? And when did you realize that accelerationism was a problem?
It first came to the attention of practitioners during the referral processes for the UK Prevent strategy, or more broadly that would be the countering violent extremism or preventing violent extremism strategies that we see around the world. And we found within the UK that the cases that were being referred for concerns around really extreme right-wing terrorism scenarios and radicalizations were featuring there were three really very distinct factors. So the three factors are incredibly young age, in some cases 12, 13 years old, and we're talking about the most extreme neo-Nazi content at that age. In some cases, not just consuming the content, but actually trying to radicalize other people from that younger age, which is incredibly shocking. So you've got the young age, you've got the most extreme accelerationist content, and you've got the ubiquitous kind of use of digital media in which to disseminate this content and try and influence other people.
And was there a specific moment you remember when you realized, like, there's a real problem that we as practitioners need to do something about?
Now it would be in that last kind of 9 or 10 years, the technology has advanced so considerably that they're in things like Discord, like Twitch, some of these kind of more niche and esoteric platforms. It didn't exist 10 years ago. And it's just a way of taking that propaganda and taking those kind of more extreme narratives and digitally amplifying them in a way that we weren't able to, that wasn't possible 10 years ago. And because of that, we believe that we're now seeing a massive increase and, no pun intended, an acceleration of these issues more broadly in society.
And how is this spread out? Geographically, demographically, is there a stereotypical accelerationist, or is there not a typical person who is vulnerable to becoming radicalized? What do you think?
The real challenge, I think, not just for countering violent extremism and countering radicalisation, but for counter-terrorism policing and the criminal justice systems more broadly, is that these are very, very young people, sometimes, or very often, in fact, from very fractured backgrounds, very isolated individuals, poor mental health. We're finding very vulnerable young people, teenagers, in the dock, in the criminal justice system, and finding themselves in prison or young offenders institutions.
Thank you, Will. That was helpful, horrifying, but really important. I'm so glad you found the time to talk to me today. This is clearly an issue that we need to become more aware of as practitioners. So thank you so much, Will.
That's okay. You're welcome.
Talking to Will, I realized how much we still have to learn as practitioners about the digital space. It made me realize how much we have to train in social media literacy and the digital world in general. Being a young person, you can be put in really vulnerable positions. You're going through a lot of stuff and you can feel really alone at some points. And in these spaces, talking to people you think understand you, but have ulterior motives. And as practitioners, I think we need to exist in the same spaces as these recruiters and, people who are extremist and radicalized. We have to be there and we have to really show our presence. Our next guest, Annelies Pauwels, is another expert in the area of violent right-wing extremism. And she recently wrote a really interesting and important RAND practitioner's paper on this topic in relation to accelerationism. She's currently a research fellow at Vlaams Institute in Belgium. Annelies has been doing a lot of work in the violent right-wing extremist space recently, and more specifically in relation to conspiracy narratives and lone actor attacks, which has really been seen to be relevant during this time of the COVID-19 pandemic and the online presence. Hi, Annelies. Thank you for coming on. How are you doing?
I'm okay. How are you doing?
I'm fine. So nice to meet you.
Yeah, same for me.
So could you tell me a bit more about your RAND paper that you published on violent right-wing extremism? What was the purpose of it, and what did you find out in relation to accelerationism?
Yeah, so basically what I try to do in that paper for the Radicalization Awareness Network is try to give an overview of what violent right-wing extremism in Europe looks like today and point out some of the major trends that have taken place the last years within this scene.
And did you find that accelerationist one was any different from other types of I guess you could say more traditional or well-known right-wing extremist narratives?
Accelerationism, I think there is a bit of a difference there with some of the other movements as they are very, very active on the internet. And usually you always have a combination of online and offline movement and people that know each other, individuals that are engaged in these networks. They're both online and offline active, but within accelerationist movement, often we see that's only an online. So I think that's one of the big differences.
Is this narrative especially targeted at lone actors, typically more vulnerable to the accelerationist narrative?
I think there's some elements in the accelerationist narrative that really is inspiring for somebody who wants to commit action. They promote this idea that they are some kind of a vanguard, so they are some kind of a front runners. They are the ones who will actually hasten the collapse of society and then actually rebuild society in the means that they want it to be. For instance, the fact that there is the idea that they are running out of time. the part of the explanation why accelerationism is such appealing to lone actors is also that it's actually a tactic that has been promoted by strategists in the movement already in the previous century, together with leaderless resistance strategy, these are two strategies that they actually promoted quite actively before. So they're quite go hand in hand as well, I would say.
Just reconnecting to your point on social media, I've been shocked to hear about some of the aspects of accelerationism. I'm a practitioner myself. I'm a young person. I have younger siblings, and I spend a lot of time on social media myself. And I'm really asking myself, how can I be missing this thing that is basically right under my nose?
Yeah, I think what we have to say maybe here is that of course this is not something that goes on all the mainstream networks. I think it is something that is present on mainstream networks. Often there's a lot of tactics that make so that it seems in a more mainstreaming way, so it seems more normalized. For instance, what they often use is like memes as a way to make it funny or just a joke. So people know somehow that there is a very extremist narrative in the meme, but it's very difficult to really say something about it because it was just a joke. And these are all tactics that they use. For instance, dog whistling is also a tactic that they use quite often. So saying things but in different words that are less shocking, but those who actually know the theories or are in the movement, they actually know what we're really talking about. But they use different wording, acceptable terminology. So that makes that it's not always clear for everybody. That's one thing that is on mainstream movements, is in mainstream platforms. But obviously this often goes on once, people get drawn into these more closed networks, for instance, like Telegram, where you really have people interacting and go more deeper and more open about their ideas and their views.
And do you think this means that we have to adapt the way we work in PCVE so that we really can understand the root of this problem? Like, do we have to adapt as practitioners?
There's definitely need to adapt to more online sphere. And what we see is that many repressive actors, for instance, law enforcement, intelligence agencies, they have already done that work, so they're very much more active on the online sphere. But for preventive actors, it is really quite complicated. What we see is that many PCVE practitioners are starting their first steps to also be active in the online world. For instance, what you see is digital youth working, so youth work organizations that are active on the internet. But that still requires an offline element as well. For instance, gaining trust of people. That is something that often you can only do in the real life and not on the internet. But also there is organizations that are active on online counseling, so trying to reach out to digital users by closing the gap that they might actually feel in the offline world to go and search for psychological help or other advice or support. But again, here it's complicated to see what works actually, because there's not much of evaluation done yet. And as I mentioned before, many of these practitioners encounter a lot of difficulties, for instance, ethical issues, data privacy. So there's a lot of obstacles that they keep encountering, and they obviously are not in the right place to solve these problems by themselves. So there's a lot of work, I think, to be done to be more active in the online world, for sure.
Great. Thank you so much for talking to me, Annelies. Talking to Annelies, I was definitely able to get a holistic picture of the accelerationist movement. But also, I think what really kind of stuck with me is how this narrative really attracts people because of its, act now or never philosophy. That really struck me. I think as practitioners, it's important to see this as like two separate worlds. There's the offline world and there's the online world, where we really I feel like we have to adapt. We have to take the evolution of the online world more into consideration when working with PCVE. If we adapt and if we become more fluent in the digital language, we can help tackle a problem that seems to be existing in the online sphere, but it has real life consequences. And as practitioners, we shouldn't be afraid of this. It's a part of our constant evolution and our constant development as practitioners. Again, I want to say thank you to my wonderful guests and to you guys for listening. My name is Maya Rosen, and I hope you can join me for the next episode of Ran in Focus.